Have you told your friends that you see ghosts?
Oh, absolutely not.
Gina Rodriguez returns in Not Dead Yet.
I'm back, baby.
Who is that?
Oh, she's the obituary writer.
And Brad Garrett joins the brilliant ensemble cast.
Titan, Maverick, Titan of all Mavericks. These are all words used to describe me.
Not Dead Yet. Season premiere. Tonight, 8:30, 7:30 Central on ABC. And stream on Hulu.
It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hello and welcome to the Happy Families podcast. My name's Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm here with my wife and mum to our 6 kids, Mrs. Happy Families, Kylie Coulson, for one of my favourite episodes of the podcast and the one that Kylie gets more excited about each month than any other podcast. You're smiling at me like...
For all the wrong reasons.
What do you mean? What do you get excited about this podcast for? It's the doctor's desk
I don't
episode.
think excitement's the right word.
How would you describe it? Don't answer that question. We have 3 studies to talk about today, and they're fun studies. They're the kind of studies that get people opinionated, I think is the right word. We're going to talk about teenagers and their mental health when it comes to screens. We're going to talk about toddlers and their problematic media use when it comes to screens. And then we're going to talk about teenagers in love and what it's doing to their sleep and their well-being. And we'll tell you why we discourage our kids from having any kind of romantic relationship until they've finished high school. And it ties in so well with the research. Where do you want to start, Kylie?
Well, you sent me through some data, which is just blowing my mind.
Really?
New Gallup survey.
Hang on, just pause here. Are you telling me that the doctor's desk is actually blowing your mind?
It always blows my mind. It doesn't mean I'm excited about it.
Okay. By the way, for those of you who are new to the podcast, once a month we go through the latest science as it relates to parenting. That's what we're doing here. So what's the data say that blew your mind, honey bun?
It shows that US teenagers spend an average of 4.8 hours per day using social media.
Okay, just stop there. This is really important. We're not talking about other screen time. We're speaking specifically about social media. Let's round it up. 4.8. Let's call it 5 hours per day on social media.
So kids are at school for 6 hours. Take out the lunch breaks.
Yep.
6 hours at school. This is huge.
Yeah, so 5 hours a day. And they've still got to watch TV, do homework, play video games, and do all that kind of stuff as well. So a huge amount of screen time.
But then it goes on to say that nearly 30% of teenagers surveyed spend upwards of 6 hours.
Yeah, huge numbers. So what do you think they're doing? If you were to guess what they're doing, where would you point?
I think for a lot of them, there is a huge level of communication going on using their social platforms.
Yeah, so Insta and Snap are huge for communication and sharing ideas and things with one another.
But I would suggest that the majority of their time would be scrolling.
Yeah, the two most popular platforms, YouTube and TikTok.
I was actually just talking to a handful of girls the other day in relation to their schoolies getaway.
Oh, yeah.
And these kids, they're not up for partying at night or anything like that. So one of the girls would go to the other girl's room and she said she was literally on TV watching the infomercials, literally just one advertisement after the other. Like our kids are just happy to be consumers of content, regardless of what the content is.
Yeah, so this is the really interesting for me in this research that came out of Gallup. They found that kids, the main reason that they're using their screens is, are you ready for it?
Boredom. Yeah, 100%.
And this is why I keep on saying that it's not good for kids to be bored. Like in the mummy blogosphere and all over Instagram and even a lot of parenting experts, they're constantly saying, it's good for kids to be bored because they're going to get creative and because they're going to discover stuff. And it's like, no, they're not. They're going to sit on their screens. They're going to stare at social media for 5 or 6 hours a day, which is what this research is showing. We've got to be really mindful of that. Now, the research is looking at mental health problems and screen use, and this is where it gets really provocative. Okay, so there is a relationship in this data highlighting that higher levels of screen use are associated with mental health problems. But, and I can't emphasize this enough, this is something that I've been so conflicted by this over the years, and I'm starting to firm up my opinion. And ironically, it's going counter to the prevailing opinion, which often happens with me. But the reason for it is this. Social media critics are all about saying screens are damaging our kids. And there's no doubt that some kids truly are being harmed by what's going on with screens and social media use. But the data shows that the effects of this are really small, particularly in relation to the large decline in mental health over the last couple of decades. Like, it's a genuinely small decline. Oh, and also there's a difference between correlation and causation, which is super important to highlight.
Hang on, you're saying that there's been a massive decline in mental
Health.
Sorry, okay.
Okay, so mental illness is on the way up. I'm so glad you picked that up. I hear so many, even medical professionals, they'll say, oh, yeah, the problem was mental health. No, the problem is not mental health. The problem is mental illness or a lack of mental health. Please don't say that somebody's issue is mental health. That's not the issue. The issue is mental illness or a lack of mental health.
So there's been a decline in mental health,
And
which
an
means
increase.
an increase in mental illness.
Correct. That's exactly right. Now, they are different things. You can actually have high levels of mental illness and still be functioning reasonably well and have high levels of well-being at the same time, in the same way that you can have high levels of grief but still have moments of joy, delight and happiness. Okay, so two things can be true at once. Anyway, that's a kind of a side note. What's really driving so I've got a friend. His name is Andy Shabalski, works at Oxford at the Institute of the Oxford Internet Institute, and Andy Shabalski has famously said that the amount of time you spend on screens, including social media, matters less for your well-being than how many potatoes you eat each week, which is quite a provocative thing to say. In other words, your well-being is affected more by the potatoes you eat than how much social media time you're getting. And what he's really highlighting here is something that I think is really important. And this research, I think, supports this. Social media, in and of itself, may or may not be a problem. But if kids are living whole and balanced lives, if they're getting outside, moving their bodies.
Well, if they're living whole and balanced lives, they don't have 6 hours to sit on a screen.
They probably don't. That's right. They're going to be getting enough sleep and they're going to be spending time with their friends and spending time in a relationship. I think that the decline in well-being for our children is actually related more to a lack of physical activity, a lack of time in nature, a lack of play, and increased control by parents, increased expectations by parents that the kids have got to be amazing. To me, that's what it comes down to. And adding support to why I'm saying it, have a listen to this. This is from the Gallup poll that was run with the Institute for Family Studies in the United States. Children, they found, who exhibit greater self-control, so that's a personality characteristic. If you've got kids who are more conscientious, in other words, children who are more conscientious or have greater self-control or who live with their parents who restrict screen time and supervise them and have a strong relationship with them, spend a whole lot less time on social media than those without these characteristics. They found that, for example, adolescents who exhibit high levels of conscientiousness spend on average about 1.2 hours less per day on social media than those scoring low on conscientiousness. And if they're living with a parent who agrees or strongly agrees that he or she should restrict screen time, then the adolescent reports 1.7 fewer hours on average of social media use compared to adolescents whose parents don't restrict screen time. In other words, we're talking about up to 3 hours with conscientious kids whose parents are involved in their lives and are saying, hey, we need to keep an eye on your screen time. They're going to do better. Youth who report a stronger and more loving relationship with their caregivers and spend less time unsupervised also use social media less frequently. And guess what? Their mental health is better. So I think all of this stuff kind of combines to say live healthy, happy lives, and screens can play a part in your life and you'll be okay. But if you're not doing well, screens are only going to amplify and magnify that challenge.
So study number 2, 435 parents actually participated in this study.
Yeah, and this one is looking at toddlers and their screens. Let's go through this one fairly quickly because, well, we've talked too long about the first one and I really want to get to the third one because it's fun. Basically, Jane Shawcroft, she's at the University of California, Davis. She studies how we can leverage media and technology for emotional health. And she's got all these parents looking at their kids at 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5. So it's a 2-year study looking at their TV use and their tablet use. The study was published in Technology, Mind and Behaviour. And what they basically found is that the overwhelming majority of parents, 64% of parents, have some sort of rule about how much TV time their kids get. And most of them, about 22%, are saying, yeah, less than an hour a day is ideal for our 2.5-year-old.
So this doesn't surprise me because on the podcast specifically, but kind of, I guess, general speaking, you'll hear the notion that less than 2 hours a day of screen time is optimal for our kids growing up. So to see that rule playing out in more than half the parents, that doesn't shock me at all.
Yeah, and I'll even add, with kids under 5, less than an hour is ideal. So that's consistent with that. But this is the really interesting thing. Only 40% of parents said they had some sort of rule about their kids' use of tablets.
So I am actually not surprised about that either. Right. And the reason I'm not surprised about it is because I think most parents will acknowledge that a tablet or an iPhone, when we're out and about, is the best distraction for our kids. If we need our kids occupied, but we have to have them in our space.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You're out at a restaurant, you're going shopping, you're at the doctor's, all of those kinds of things. It's so easy to give your child a screen which keeps them completely occupied. You know that they will be exactly where you left them.
Yep.
They're not moving. They're not going anywhere. You might not even get a yes or a no from them because they're so engrossed in what they're doing. So it doesn't actually surprise me that parents don't kind of see this as problematic because it's actually such a helpful tool.
Yeah, so only 10% of parents said that they didn't allow their kids to ever use a tablet. So pretty much everyone's like, yeah, the kids can use it and we don't really have any rules for it. What the researchers found was that it takes time to really get results here. They found that from 2.5 to 3.5, there was no real issue when it came to problematic media use. But by the time the kids were 4.5, there was a really, really big increase. The more kids were allowed to use their screens, particularly tablets, but even the TV, the more likely it was that there was going to be problematic media use. So a couple of really simple lessons here. Number one, sometimes it takes a while to figure out what social media or tablets or screens generally, TV, what it's doing to our kids. Definitely. The second thing to say would be that rules about TV and screens and tablets and things actually do matter. Like, as parents, we need to be across this with our little kids, otherwise it could be unhealthy. And the third rule would be just to be really intentional. Like, we're not saying don't put the kids in front of screens. We're saying be purposeful. Know when you're doing it, know why you're doing it, know what they're doing there, and make sure that there are reasonable limits, because the kids need to live whole, balanced, full lives. They need to be connected with you. They need to be playing. They need to be outdoors in nature. It's almost the same as what we were talking about before with the teenagers and their social media use.
So I've got a curveball for you.
Throw it my way.
So we've got a 2-month-old grandchild.
Yeah.
And she has just in the last few weeks become very engaged. You've got great eye contact. She lights up when she sees you walk in the room. And they've been away for a few days. And Chanel has actually called so that I can see the baby and talk to her. And I've watched as the screens got closer and my face is right there, her whole eyes light up and she kind of gets a little bit stiff and, kicks her legs, and she's really excited. So we've got families all around the world who are dealing with distance and having the capacity to see your loved one's face on a screen. How does that impact kids' curiosity as they grow in wanting to have access to screens?
So they're definitely going to want to have screens because they're familiar with them, but also they're excitatory and they're stimulatory. Okay, so that's going to happen. I think it's really important to remember this. That kind of contact is delightful if it's the only contact you can get. But we still want to keep screens to a minimum. We know that screens are affecting babies and toddlers' brains in ways that are not healthy. That's the first thing. Secondly, on the Doctor's Desk podcast, maybe about 9 months ago, we did an episode where I talked about how kids were either engaged in a face-to-face interaction with a parent, or they were engaged in a technology-based interaction face-to-face through the screens. And what the researchers found was that there was about 20% of the brain lighting up and getting excited about the interaction when it was on a screen, whereas 100% was going crazy when it was face-to-face. In other words, you just can't beat the real thing.
Of course. But when the real thing's not there?
Well, you take what you can get when the real thing's not there, but you push for the real thing.
I'm really missing out. Number 3 is one that you're obviously extremely excited about.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time for it, but let's go.
A new study published in the Behavioral Sleep Medicine Journal has found that beginning a romantic relationship or going through a breakup can impact poorly upon the sleep of adolescents, but it's suggesting particularly in younger adolescent females.
Okay, so We have
This feels, can I just say, this feels a little bit from the Journal of Durr.
The journal, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, because when you are in a new relationship, it's very exciting and you can't sleep. And when a relationship breaks up, you're very sad and you can't sleep.
This, like the dopamine hit we get from connection, real deep connection,
Knowing
is
that you're someone's special someone.
so addictive.
Yeah.
We are wired to connect. And the younger these relationships start, the harder it is, I think.
University of Pennsylvania researchers found that adolescents can be impacted emotionally and behaviourally. Research suggesting issues like lowered self-esteem, more mood swings, more alcohol and substance abuse when kids break up, when a relationship falls apart and they're in their teens. So they had a little over 7,000 middle and high school kids followed for around about a year or thereabouts. And they basically looked at sleep duration, insomnia, romantic experiences, and they found that experiencing either the start or the end of a relationship was associated with sleep problems or a lack of sleep or both. Not, like you said, not revelatory in any massive way, but a reminder when you've got young kids, especially because they're using their screens so much, they don't switch off. They're texting each other at 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 o'clock at night, and they're doing everything they can to be together during the relationship and at the end of the relationship. It really affects their well-being. We have discouraged our kids from having relationships of any kind of a romantic nature while they're at school. We haven't always succeeded with that because we don't force our kids, but this is one of the reasons why it affects well-being so much.
Well, I think the thing that stood out to me in this study was just the acknowledgement that younger adolescents under 15 years of age, this is bigger and harder for them because there's so much going on in their development at that point in time. So the longer we can prolong those romantic relationships, I think the happier our kids are going to be.
We need to wrap it up there. We'll link to the studies in our show notes so that you can check them out for yourself if there's anything that sparked some interest for you. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. More information about making your family happy is available at happyfamilies.com.au.